Hurricane season? So far, not a very good forecast. Why? We'll talk about this and more in the Southeast U.S. edition of the Water Resources Outlook. So here's a look at the past rainfall, and just so you know, I'm going solo again today like I did last time. We've had a lot of people on trips and so forth, and so you're going to get me again today, so hopefully we can get through this pretty quickly. And what you can see here is the last 2 weeks of rainfall. Now this is a percent of normal. Across central Florida, South Alabama, and the panhandle of Florida, we've been much above normal. Also across South Carolina. Areas where we've been below normal, North Carolina, Virginia, South Florida, and then in northern Alabama and Mississippi. As we look back, and this is just for the last 2 weeks, but as we look back over the last 2 months, you can see that most of the southeast has been covered by above normal rainfall. And even if they've had below normal rainfall, you don't see any reds in there. You don't see anything with 12 and 16 inches below normal, kind of like what we've seen over the last 2 or 3 years during this time of year. And so we are looking at plenty of water across the southeast, and in some cases a little bit too much. We've been fortunate during this time to not have severe flooding in a lot of places. We have had some pretty significant flooding, especially down in South Georgia and along the coast of South Carolina and so forth, and there have been some impacts there, but based on the rain that we've had, we really haven't had huge impacts in those areas, and that's good news. All right, now that we've looked at the last 14 days and the last 16 days of rainfall across the southeast, we're going to look at rainfall in selected cities across the southeast. And we're going to start out with the Atlanta graph here, and then as we go, we're going to have selected cities all over, and the graphs will match in their content as far as what they're showing, but we'll talk about the differences and how it looks as we go through the southeast. So starting off here, each graph will have a black line, which shows the average rainfall between January 1st and the end of July. It'll have brown lines, the lowest 5 rainfall up to this point for those years, and then a green line, which shows the wettest time in those years. There's a variation of historical data, so we have anywhere between probably 60 and over 100 years of historical data to be used. And so that's what all those black lines and everything is in the middle. And then the blue line shows the observed data. And so what we see in this first graph is the Atlanta rainfall, and as you can see, it goes very much along the normal rainfall for the early part of the year. We were getting normal rainfall early in the year, and then we really started to pick up. And you can see how it jumped, especially this summer, which had above normal rainfall in this area, and now it is the second wettest of all time up to this point. And so you can also, I have a graph up above to show different parts of the state, and in many areas we're 7th, we're 2nd, we're top, that you can pause and take a look at that. And you can do that with each of the different graphs as I go through. Now we're going to go west. We're going to look at Birmingham. A similar pattern, although we were more above normal at the beginning of the year, and then stayed normal during that time. That blue line kind of stayed mostly parallel to that. And then again, from this summer, we really started to pick up. And so as you can see, in much of Alabama, these have been almost the top 10 in a lot of these places. Now Mobile hasn't been quite as wet. It's been a little bit drier. And again, this is going to be a pattern you're going to see as we go through each of the states and everywhere in the southeast. As we get closer to the coast, in most cases, not all cases, we're a little bit drier. And you'll notice this mostly as we go to the east coast in just a moment. So here's Roanoke, and again, they've had a very, very wet summer, and over the last, really in the July time frame, they really jumped up. For part of the year, they stayed pretty close. They were above normal, and then they jumped up very quickly. And so then we get closer to the coast in Richmond on the graph above, and you can see that it's at least a little bit lower. We've gone from being the wettest and then slid to the west and be some lower. Now we go to Greenville, South Carolina for the first 5 months of the year, 4 to 5 months. We were fairly quiet. We stayed, normal rainfall, and then it started to really jump up. If you look at the reservoirs in Savannah, all over the southeast, they've all filled up. We've had an excess of water, so whatever deficits they had before, they have filled up, and they're actually above normal in many cases. So here we are, Greenville, and then we're going to go east towards the coast. Here's Charlotte, and so we're not quite as wet there, although we're still pretty wet. And you can see, again, same as Greenville, that for first part of the year we were a little bit close to normal, and then as the summer's gotten here, we've gotten a lot wetter. And right now we're the fifth wettest year up to this point for Charlotte. You'll notice that Cape Hatteras is the 38th wettest, so it's actually not. It's been a little bit above normal, but not very far above normal. And then the Asheville is the wettest, similar to Greenville, Spartanburg, and being in the mountains. And then we're going to go down to Tallahassee along the Florida Gulf Coast, and they have had some good rainfalls. Now, they started off pretty dry at the beginning of the year, and then they got some pretty darn good rainfall during the beginning of that year, or it's kind of the end of February, beginning of March time frame. Again, stayed normal, and then have really kind of gotten wet as we've gotten at the middle of the year, kind of that July time frame, and even in August they have been pretty wet. So that's one of the areas. Now, you'll notice in the graph above, there's I mentioned it before, there's a wide variety of different things in there, and you'll see that Key West is its fourth wettest. We look at, Fort Myers is not quite as high. It's actually, in the 40s and so forth. So there's a wide variety in Florida, and this is very indicative of the pop-up type thunderstorms that have been in there, and how the East Coast, we haven't had as much sea breeze type thunderstorms, and along the East Coast it hasn't been quite as wet this year. But overall, Florida has been very wet, and we'll see that in just a moment. So now let's look at the precipitation rankings for both July and the seasonal May through July. And what you see is that we've had an extremely wet July, and we expected that just based on all the things that I've been talking about. And it's the wettest ever in Florida, and we're at the top in all of the southeast states except for Mississippi, which has not been so high. But in the Carolinas, Virginia, we're seeing much above normal, and this goes for the May through July seasonal rankings, still extremely high. The wettest in South Carolina. And actually, Mississippi kind of catches up that they're wetter than normal for that time period. So for the whole time period and for the whole summer, we have been very wet. And so that's good news for a lot of the recharge that we needed, and we've been dry for so long, we should be caught up in most of those areas. So why did this happen? Well, one of the things is we look at the composite weather pattern and kind of what was going on during that time. We had high pressure sitting over the west, and we had high pressure over the Atlantic. And between we had a trough, and that trough we continued to get fronts coming through. We also got moisture out of the Gulf, and we stayed a little bit cooler than normal, so we continued to get moisture, and of course we had a feedback loop going through there, so we had a lot of things happening. But having that blocking type pattern sitting there and keeping that moisture coming out of the Gulf and keeping us in an active weather pattern kept us wet during that time. And so that's what we looked at in July, where we've taken a little break from that right now, and we'll talk about that in the meteorology just for a moment, but it looks like we might be getting back into that in just a little bit. So what has that done with our stream flows? Well, as you can see, almost over all of the southeast, we're either above normal or much above normal, with still some black, and we're high for this time of year. And so the only places where we're really seeing normal and a couple below normal is in North Carolina and Virginia, where recently we've been a little bit drier. They've had a little bit of a break from the rainfall and haven't seen quite as much. And so the stream flows have kind of come down during that time, which is good news. We've had a little bit of dry weather, which should help all of the southeast recover a little bit until maybe we start seeing some wetness again. So now I'm again going to talk a little bit about the meteorology, and my meteorologists have been busy dealing with all the rain, so I'm going to take care of this. And we're looking now at the next week, and this is the rainfall expected over the next week. And we, like I mentioned before, we've kind of gotten quieted down just a little bit. Hasn't been quite as wet over the last few days, which will give us a break, but it does look like we're going to pick up a little bit, and it does look like we'll have a little bit more rain during that time. More summer type thunderstorms. It doesn't look like it'll be heavy, except maybe over the Virginia and Carolinas area, where they could take a little bit of it. They've actually had a little bit of a break up there. Their rivers are normal, so they could probably handle a little bit more of the rainfall, especially along that Hatteras area, where which was talked about earlier, and could use some more of that rain. South Florida could also use a little bit of that rain because they've been a little bit dry, as looking at the rainfall down there earlier. And so we're in pretty good shape for that first week, and then even the second week. Now, most of the rain looks like it's going to be early in the second week. It doesn't look like it's going to be late in that second week, but it does look like we continue to stay wet after this period, and we don't get out of that. Just for those of you who are out west, it looks like we're going to have a little bit above normal rainfall west, which all of them could use, and then a break in the middle of the country. So kind of that weather pattern is setting up that it looks like we may be wet in that second week also. Again, we'll be watching that. That gets us to the bulk of the hurricane season. That gets us to, the main part of the hurricane season comes right then, and it's September 14th is the middle of that. So we'll be watching that to see if hurricanes start to develop at that time. So one of the reasons that the hurricanes might not develop, the Saharan dust layer has been very active this year. There's been a lot of dust coming off of Africa, and that tends to be an inhibitor. I've been reading some articles and looking at some stuff about that. It really has been inhibiting our hurricane and tropical storm development. We've had a few tropical storms just get started this year in different places, but really nothing has gotten going, and there's been no hurricanes yet this year. Nothing has gotten strong. Nothing's had the opportunity to really develop. And part of the reason is the Saharan dust layer. We talked about that in our last Water Resources Outlook, and really that hasn't changed a whole lot. And as long as that's out there, that's going to impact our hurricane season. And so in the introduction, I talked about our hurricane season. Well, we really didn't have a very good forecast with warmer temperatures along the Gulf and kind of warmer temperatures in the Atlantic and the Gulf. And then also because we were in neutral conditions, it looked like we would have a normal hurricane season. But there's some things you can't factor in and you don't know exactly what's going to happen. And this is probably one of those things that impacted it. As for our 1 month outlook, this is for September, and our above normal rainfall kind of shifts a little bit to the north and more in the Ohio Valley and the Pennsylvania area, but we still have a little bit of that in the mountains and so forth. Part of that is probably still some feedback. We'll continue. We've got lots of water on the ground, lots of water in the area, so that will continue for a while. So it looks like September should be more normal right now. And again, even a normal year, we're supposed to get a tropical system or two, and right now we don't see anything, at least on the early part of the horizon. This is for September, the 3-month outlook for September, October, and November, and the above normal chances kind of shifts to the west a little bit. What the Climate Prediction Center is showing is that things are going to kind of shift, and that for the southeast, it looks like equal chances for above normal, near normal, or below normal rainfall. And so that's what we're looking at right now. Think that'll be pretty good, but what that does is it transitions into the December, January, and February time frame. Now, right now, it looks like a neutral conditions for that time, but the CPC, some of the models that they're looking at, they're showing some dryness in the area. Now, whether this is going to happen or not, it's kind of hard to say. We may go into that time being wet, so it will impact the rivers either way. So, again, we're going to have to watch that very closely. Even a below normal precipitation during that time, if we've been wet coming up to that point, could cause some flooding during the December, January, and February timeframe when we expect recharges, and right now it looks like we're in good shape going into that time. So the bottom line for the southeast, well, in the short term, we're getting to the peak of the tropical season. How active it's going to be, it doesn't look like it's going to be as active as we originally expected, but we still have to keep our eyes open to see what's going on, because one storm, with all the wetness we've had, could cause a lot of problems. As for the long term, well, it looks like a return to more normal rainfall patterns. It looks like as we get into September, October, more dry days than wet, which we haven't been used to, and a little bit more frontal type stuff. So we should have longer periods of dryness between the wetness, and that's what it's looking like right now. This ended up being a little bit longer than expected because I had a lot to talk about. So our next Water Resources Outlook won't come until September 17th, 2013. Thank you for listening to this week's edition of the Water Resources Outlook. Remember, you can find much of this information at our website at weather.gov/SERFC. Also, come and visit our Facebook page where we will provide notifications of products we issue. Also, feel free to comment and pass that information along. And if you have any questions or comments, please contact me at the email address todd.hamill@noaa.gov.